Okay, I guess we are live. Yes, we are. Okay. Even though it is not quite 8 o'clock, or it is 8 o'clock. All right. Yeah, it seems weird, but this is the frame we want, so we leave it at that. Maybe a little bit more like this. Welcome to the Real Humans, Great Souls podcast with yours truly, Professor Johanna Sophia of Johanna's Raw Foods and the RawSomeLifeGlobal.com online university and the Real Humans, Great Souls podcast. So today's topic is, of course, one that is close to my heart and my gray hair and my mindset, and that is age is beautiful if, of course, we make it so, could go on that, if you do the right thing, if you have, and that's what we're going to talk about in this podcast. What if we could all live happily, healthily, and in sanity to 120 without dementia, without Alzheimer's, without all those aches and pains that are so prevalent, especially in the Western world, especially in a world where we have done so much to our natural biology. Now, of course, let's not forget that we claim in the Western world that we have enhanced our age, right? We have created better longevity with modern medicine. Well, the truth, the facts, the longevity facts actually don't quite support that, if at all. So, of course, we have done much harm in many cultures to our lifespan by living in particular environments, in particular cultures that would support the ingesting of things like lead and would support medicines like arsenic and would support, and of course, we're not very far away from those toxic elements in today's world either. But there have been and still are many cultures that prove that we can have a happy, healthy life to our full lifespan. What's our full lifespan? Okay. Let's just look at the biology of most mammals. And it's been established a long time ago that most mammals live to an average of 10 times their sexual maturity age. Now, cats live much longer than 10 years for the most part, especially when they're domesticated, right? Because it turns out that being a predator is actually very hard out there. It's harder than being an herbivore in many ways because you're so dependent on catching prey that often isn't as abundant as you would need. So predators don't really have it easier than other mammals in any case. So if we were all to live on average to 10 times our sexual maturity age, and we set the sexual maturity age, the age at which we reproduce naturally, even at 12 years, of course, we cringe at having babies at 12 years in today's world, right? I mean, we find that completely obnoxious and child abuse. But even if we were to consider that the age that is our sexual maturity, we would grow to 120 naturally on average. That means some would grow older, some would be younger, but that would be the natural mammalian age range. of the mammal that is the human species. Now, of course, we're also naturally of a category of mammals that we don't like to acknowledge, but biologically, our whole biology, our digestive tract, and our functioning and bone structure and all of our muscle structure, etc., is akin to herbivores. So we are biologically herbivores. And surprise, surprise, the people who live the longest, for the most part, have a high plant-based diet. All right, but let's start with what have we done culturally in the West? And what do other cultures do differently? Who loves aging and old people and the wisdom and contribution they make to the society, and who kind of discards old age and people who are unfortunately in decline so often before passing away eventually. So that is the first question, why is it that some cultures are able to honor age and respect and feel that they benefit from those who have lived a long time, and other cultures feel that the elderly are useless eaters, in quotation mark? This is actually being spoken by some people who feel like they need to tell us what is a worthy age of being alive, right? So yeah. And then we find out that actually the majority of cultures on the planet do honor age. And it is the highly developed, in quotation marks again, the highly industrialized, developed empire cultures that do not. So they're the ones more likely to have a short life, to have less longevity, to live in more toxicity and in less happiness. So getting to that, and I want to look at that a little bit in a historical context and in a cultural context. So in the historical context, that means that that we see that wherever there are large empires, like look at the Roman culture, and we find that the Roman culture actually used so much lead in their products and had such a toxic lifestyle. We also know all these stories of total overeating of the people who were the haves, and the have-nots did undereat, if you will, right? So we have these two parts of the class society, the ones that overeat in these big feasts and literally used feathers to puke out what they had just eaten so that they could eat more. I mean, a whole culture of bulimic people. We would call that today. So I had never actually thought about it in these words, but that's really what it is. So their life expectancy actually, and of course it's not just the food and the lead, it is also of course living in cities with open sewage and no trees or nature in the immediate environment of people's living quarters, which is an interesting observation as well. Cultures that have nature within their communities, within their living environments, seem to have better outcome, which would be natural, right? They have better air, they have better, because trees and plants produce that extra oxygen in the overnights, etc. We all know that, but we don't take it into consideration. Whereas if we live in a city without plant life, we're missing all that. We're missing the air produced by plant life around us. Um, and then, of course, is to be considered the role that age plays, that old people play in any kind of cultural setting. In the Romans' case, people of this upper class were so decrepit that they literally had a life expectancy of 40 years. Some say even only 36. Well, let's just say 40. Average life expectancy is 40. So that's really very young. So you have to have a pretty toxic life to be falling apart physically at age 40. While African nations, Asian nations, and of course my beloved Hunza that I'll talk more about in a little bit, um, already and a long time ago lived to over 100, 120 and more. So in today's world, in the Western world, we're once again in decline in terms of our longevity, our life expectancy. So we are experiencing that our children have a lower life expectancy than ourselves. And that has to do with a lot of factors, obviously, but that's what I want to talk about also. How can we turn that around? Now, longevity is, of course, not just making it um, in a dementia state, in a dilapidated physical state to some age, uh, being spoon fed to 90 something, which is not old, but not being able to function. Um, that is not the age I want to promote, obviously. Why is that? Why has that happened in the Western world, that we have this decline, this cognitive decline, this brain fog, this physical decline with arthritis and hip replacements, knee replacements, shoulder replacements, you name it. And we fail to improve on those things. Of course, our culture lives on earning money with any kind of profession. And of course, a doctor needs to earn money too. So the doctor, of course, earns more money when he can replace your hip than when he advises you, like I would to change your lifestyle and therefore become strong and healthy. So we have this whole culture in the Western world where old age is dispensable, were it not for the medical industrial complex that needs the old age people to keep themselves running in terms of supplying the medications and the doctor's visits and the surgeries and the home environment and the aids, etc. So an entire industry has been built around old people having to be sick. I actually wanted to start with, and now I have to go back to that. The Western world has turned the two most pivotal events in any human life into diseases or into a problem, and that is birth and death. Birth and death, and my dear colleague, Dr. Zach, Bush, colleague, just in terms of what we promote, describes it because he has worked both in the birthing quarters and in the geriatrics arena as a medical doctor. And he says that both are births into a new form of existence. So both coming into this world, coming out of this womb of being held within another being, right? And becoming a person, a human being yourself, a real human with a great soul, and the transition into leaving this body behind and exiting into the other realm, whichever you envision that realm to be. But it is, again, as a birthing experience that should be honored and supported, as opposed to, and I'm not talking about suicide support. That's not at all what I'm talking about. I'm talking about at the end of the long life, when a person has the feeling that this is a complete lifespan. And that does happen when people have been able to live their full life cycle, that we can allow them to pass with dignity, with loving people around them, etc. So these two events, the birth and the death, have both been almost vilified as dangerous, terrible events that we all have to worry about and medicate and do all kinds of things in order to in order to control, I suppose, those processes, whereby they should be natural processes that naturally happen, and that are celebrations really of life, both the coming into life of a new human being and the passing into the afterlife, or whichever you feel it is. Of course, I personally see life as a life cycle that has many repetitions. So I see myself, I feel myself, I know myself to be the being that happens to be in this body for this lifetime, and upon leaving will much later, probably in earthly time, come back in another body. So yeah, there we have this wonderful life cycle that we should all celebrate, turned into two medical events that need to be managed and medicated and prevented and all kinds of things, especially the death one, of course, as opposed to honoring it as a process. So therefore, to me, life and death are both equally important to consider. And while this talk is about aging and honoring that lifespan by being able to look back and take all that experience into the moment of living. Like, I'm only 70, but I know and have met people, of course, in their 80s and hundreds. So what is it that we can do to make this the best chapters of life, from the 60s through the hundreds? That's a huge chunk of life that can be more than half your adult life. and we're dishonoring it as of 60, kind of. We're like on a lot of medications and on a lot of life support in so many ways, in terms of chemicals that people ingest to keep something going that they think they cannot keep going otherwise. So, honoring age is maybe the first step toward being able to live to an older age joyfully, happily. To me, happiness is a very big component of a good life. And as I see it, happiness is derived from purpose, from a meaningful contribution to the community. And interestingly, I just listened to a TED talk about this Harvard study where they followed people from all walks of life, from birth over now 100 years, almost, not quite, just a few years missing, with different people, of course, continuing the study always. And they found that the number one factor for aging well was loving relationships. And it doesn't have to be a romantic relationship, loving relationships in the community with friends, with children and grandchildren. So we're getting back to what was recently also studied and talked about much on the interwebs, the grandma effect, right? The blue zones in the world, the zones where people live the longest, all have that same communal web in which a human being is held to get to an older age, and then to be the one holding the entire generations coming after them, because their minds and their physical existence is functioning enough to be able to do that. Now, if our brain goes, then we have no way of contributing in a meaningful way. In fact, we turn into the person that needs to be aided and supported and helped, and costs a lot of money because of a lot of medical expenses, etc., as opposed to being the grandma who is able to help and look after the children and grandchildren and great grandchildren and be present, or be present intellectually in their lives. Of course, there are also people traveling the world and doing things productively. Like my friend Mimi Kirk, who's only just turned 85, but at age 80, she decided to start yet another career, doing these large paintings, beautiful stuff, and having exhibitions, etc. So, number one, being in loving relationships. Okay, what's number two? Oh, I wanted to talk a little bit more about that relationship. It's not just the loving relationship, it's the meaningful contribution also can be very easily seen in our world and in other communities and cultures on the planet, that when a person has a position that is honored in the community, their brains keep better. That's why often you have leaders or presidents or royalty, etc., who remain sharp into high age. And I'm not promoting that that we should go back to royalty, but unless each of us can claim to be queens and kings and royalty in our own right, because that's really where life is going. I think, where the next era is going, that we each can step into that leadership power and have purpose in the world, and therefore have the ability, the physical ability, to keep our bodies and our brains in particular so fit that there will not be dementia, there will not be Alzheimer's. Now, of course, there's more to that. Shield of Megatron, who are you? Reveal yourself, is saying that these are excellent points. I, I love it when people chat, and I will always include what you have to say. So please explain a little more what you mean. I just realized that I forgot to put my ring light on me, so I'm a little dark here, but that's what you have to bear with today. So my age is not very well lit. All these little creeks and crevices, cracks and crevices. Okay, so leaders seem to age better and stronger than followers, or I should take that even further, people who are not operating in their own right. Like a farmer who operates their own farm will have better life expectancy than a factory worker. Of course, factory workers we immediately associate, especially a couple of 100 years ago, with toxicity and dustiness, and or yeah, an environment that is not pleasant and not healthy. So, but the same is true also for the cubicle worker, who is almost like a factory worker in so many ways, right? And it seems we're growing out of that era of industrial miners and factory workers and cubicle workers, and this normed repetitive work that people have to do who are in these industrial complexes, be they at a desk or be they in a mine. Um, Unfortunately, of course, we assign those jobs still to our former colonies and basically keep them colonies, and therefore, again, shorten the life expectancy of those people very drastically. And we can see that um, incredibly apparent. Um, so be the leader, be on purpose and meaningful is number one for having a fulfilled next and next and next chapter in your post 60 age range, right? Um, so, how then do we create that happiness in addition to the purpose? Well, I guess the purpose could also be seen as the last cherry on the cake. It starts, of course, with the biology of this body having to be functional. And for that, I have to go back to how biology works, right? We replicate our body as long as we are alive all the time. I just learned that what are they called? Filaments or something like that. These tiny little fibers on the inside of our intestines that absorb, that both push down the nourishment as it comes in and absorb the nutrients and dispense it through the intestinal walls into the blood, etc., where it needs to go. These little elements are the fastest replicating biological elements in our body. So while our heart supposedly takes 21 days, the heart muscle, to renew itself, which I also thought is amazing. I used to, in my talks now many years ago, say, well, how long do you think it takes for the heart to renew itself? And then people, I would say 21 years. No. 21 months. No. 21 days. So that, I don't think everybody agrees on that, but there are indications that indeed the heart muscle is a very fast regenerating muscle tissue. But may that as it be, bone tissue take longer and so forth. We renew our body all the time. Now, we seem to get less good at it as we age, right? At this renewal. So that even with all the good food and all the good eating, you will get those wrinkles on your skin and on your face. Of course, skin is everywhere, like duh. Um, so you will not be able to replicate quite as fresh and baby skin as you had when you were a baby. But it is still amazing how much we can influence that replication with the right elements of nutrition. And of course, with the element of good water. This is spring water out of the rocks and running through dirt and plant life and coming into my bottle that I then take home. So the real thing, the minerals in this water actually are the ones that we need for proper cell reproduction. All right, so we need to supply the cell reproduction, especially as we age, with the nutrients that are needed to create the best, healthiest cells that keep us bouncing and running up and down the stairs and lifting up things that we need to carry, etc. So all of, and for example, keeping our hair color more. My hair was whiter at one point, and I just have this one white stretch here. But yeah, that's the other thing, that we can actually see it, and we can, to a certain extent, help the body renew better and even better. So for that, when we get to the nutrition, we find that all blue zones on the planet. Blue zone is what, I don't know who, I didn't research it, called the areas on the planet where people have a longer average lifespan and live healthier to the end of that lifespan, not artificially kept alive or something like that. So, and in those blue zones, it is found, I just read it again today. So now it is said that blue zone people eat 95% plant food. Let that sink in a little bit. 95%. I thought that was pretty crazy, because we've been told, well, you need those keto animal proteins, etc. And while there can be the occasional goat milk, cheese, or the occasional piece of meat when an occasion happens in those cultures, it is true that the vast majority of the food in the blue zones where people live the longest comes from what I said in the beginning, that which we already know is our biology, namely herbivores. And of course, all herbivores, I just had this little discussion today with another educator. Um, Herbivores will eat insects because tiny little insects are on the plants, on the roots, in the soil, that get eaten along with plants when they're taken out of the soil or off the tree. There will be little critters on those wild plants or natural plants. We call them wild. Why? That's nature. It's just what is on the plants that should be our food. So so including insects is actually a natural item. And I'm not promoting, there's all this hoopla about, oh, all humans need to eat insects, bugs. Oh my God, how gross. Um, but isn't it just as gross to eat the baby cow and the mama as well? Isn't that just as gross? Hello. Um, in any case, so that's how my mind works. So yes, we will eat some insects if we eat natural, fresh food. Tiny, tiny ones, often that the eye doesn't even see. But under the microscope, you would. But under the microscope, you would also see that we need a natural biome on our skin. You would also see that there are trillions of tiny little critters on our skin. And if we kill them off with sanitizers and or chemical soaps that will eliminate them, we actually don't do ourselves a favor. While the skin may for a moment become smoother, we then also put lotions back on and perfumes back on and all of the stuff that prohibits the natural breathing of the skin and the natural life of that biome on the skin. So feeding the cell tissue correctly so that especially the muscle tissue and the bone structure can remain strong. Bones are incredibly expensive. Yeah. If you buy new ones, they're incredibly expensive. And they will never be as good as the human ones. If we want to regrow healthy tissue, we need to feed that tissue well, and we need to make sure that the important elements such as healthy fats are not killed off by either heat or chemicals. So that's one thing that I teach. If you want to learn more about it, connect with me. There's quite many ways that you can connect with me. I'm also inviting you to join the goals class. Goals, set your goals and reach them too, is probably could be a subtitle. Yeah. So one thing is food. The next thing for proper cell reproduction, of course, is oxygen. Oxygen is incredibly important because it's probably number one in our life. If we don't have oxygen, we can't be alive. We can only stay for a few minutes without breathing, right? We can stay for a few days without water. We can stay for a few weeks without foods. And that's it. Those three are stacked like that. So having enough oxygen, good air in your chest, in your bodies, so that it can go into your blood cells, blood cell tissue, is again absolutely important. Living, of course, in an environment, like I said earlier, with plant life around you or in your house. I just put my plants back into the house. You don't see them because they're behind the piano and other places. No, I have to turn it this way because everything's upside down. You see, I just brought those big plant pots back into the house because we're going to have frost tonight. It's going to be the first night of frost. Yeah. In upstate New York, where I sit. So, good food, good air, oxygen. There's, of course, also oxygen and good water, H2O, right? There's also good oxygen in, this is a fruit smoothie. This is all fruits, bananas, apple, pear, orange, strawberries, blueberries, and black raspberries are in here. And it is delish. Now, I was asked today, well, what do you do for your protein? And I had to explain that the best proteins for humans are actually in leafy greens. So that's why you have this mix here, which allows me to eat huge amounts of greens smashed without water, with a little lemon and apple, and there's cucumber in there, and there's broccoli in there, and there's collard greens and zucchini and avocado and celery. So it's all in there, so I can eat a huge amount of greens by the spoonfuls, right? And that helps tremendously in, again, feeding the oxygen and the proteins in an easy to absorb fashion into the intestinal tract and from there into the cell tissue of the body. So, yeah, we have those food elements. And then there's, of course, lots of other things, sprouts and grains and nuts and seeds and all the beautiful products you can make with those things, from cookies to cakes to breads and crackers and so forth. And so we have now, we put purpose at the top, even though most of the time it's at the bottom. Purpose, relationships, food, air, and water, kind of in the food arena. And next we have rest and relaxation. I developed all these methodologies when I was teaching actors way back when. Oh, I have to hurry up. I still have to have so much more to talk about. To create deep relaxation, teaching acting in Zimbabwe at my studio there with a very mixed crowd, which was beautiful. But the point is that I'm making here that this deep relaxation is absolutely crucial to get into your biological functioning and your brain functioning and your longevity ultimately. So deep relaxation is part of it. And of course, deep sleep is akin to that deep relaxation. If you don't have good sleep, again, if you fix the other issues, your deep sleep will automatically occur. If you fix the food, the breathing, the deep relaxation, you will be able to sleep. Then is movement, of course. Somebody said the other day that human bodies are made to move 80% of the time, 80% of their waking time, rather, right? So now, who of us still moves 80% of our waking time? We sit 80% of our waking time, so many of us. Um, whether we're driving or working at our desk, or, well, if we're cooking and doing things like that, at least we're standing. So that's already a little better. No, I don't have a standing desk. It's not my thing. But it should be. It's a good idea. It should be a good idea. So, yeah, so there's the rest and then there's the movement. Now, in order to keep these muscles going, it also means that we have to give them work to do. Um, darn, it's so late. So, the cultures that move every day, again, the blue zones mostly do, have until the last century, where suddenly, we can put things into cars and trains and buses and bicycles. But on a bicycle, you still have to be the driver. So you still move somewhat. You could say, well, I still have to move the pedal of my gas pedal. But you see what I mean? So our muscles have slacked off over the last 150 years. For all of us city people, we just don't move and work enough. We don't work our muscles. We don't stress our muscles. So working out becomes absolutely essential. And walking or running or dancing, but dancing, you really have to dance every day, right? Otherwise, it's not sufficiently challenging to the muscle tissue. So all those elements obviously are included in keeping us well. In order to encourage the natural reemergence, recreation of all those cell tissues. So another element then needs to be to, in our modern world, to clear poisons out of our living environment. Actually, that would have gone for the Romans too, right? Clearing out that lead from their living environment, all the lead plates and all of that. So clearing out toxins, we call them, although it's just really poison, becomes another crucial element. I was also just recently listening to a toxicity doctor who was talking about all the toxic chemicals that are in cosmetics, in household products, in uh, cleaning soaps and shampoos, etc., makeup, again, cosmetics and household products, and even in our clothes if they're not natural fibers. So, yeah, I've become a bit of a snob, I suppose, wearing organic cotton, but it's so good. It feels so good. Yeah, and that means that we also have to, again, when we allow our body to be clothed in natural fibers, we allow the breathing of all skin tissues as opposed to being shut off by plastic, which is what non-natural fibers, of course, are. Talked about it in another podcast, but yeah, we eliminate all poisons, and that includes plastics. Now, of course, nobody can exclude all plastics from our lives, right? It's just not possible. When I just look behind me, that one couch is a regular couch that we inherited from somebody, and of course the stuffings of these pillows are not natural fiber, and so there's just so much that we come across. And of course, when I pick up the mouse of my computer, that's plastic, and the entire computer is plastic, and the keyboard is plastic, and this desk is plastic or has a plastic covering on the plywood. So yeah, we're surrounded by all these chemical emissions that our body constantly has to fend off to stay in its natural cycle of reproduction. Yeah, I wanted to get to a couple of peoples that are not necessarily mentioned in the blue zones that I had researched a long time ago and again and again. Starting with Norman Walker, who is described as writing his last book at 113. I just looked him up on Wikipedia, which is no longer truthful, unfortunately. And it is here debated. There are various claims, it says here, that he reached the age of 109, 113, 116, 118, 119, whereby it used to be described that he wrote his last book at 113 and died at 117. So we don't like to admit that anymore, that natural food will actually get you to live that long. He also still rode his bicycle in his hundreds, etc. So that's a Western personality who lived on a mostly raw food diet and promoted that in the early 1900s already. Then we have stories, and I can tell a couple of personal stories. When I was teaching in Los Angeles, I was teaching languages. What was I teaching these gentlemen? Was I teaching them German? That would have been funny, but I guess I was. Yeah. There were these families from the Arab Emirates, I think. And one of them in particular would not only tell me how appalled he was that old people would be homeless and that nobody was honoring and taking care of them, and that he once had to go to a hospital and was in the emergency room, and somebody came in, an old person, and was sent back out because they didn't have any insurance. And he just could not believe that that could happen, that an old person who should be honored should be dishonored, disrespected in such a manner that they were literally sent back out because they were homeless and did not have insurance. And I think he pulled out his credit card and paid for that person to get service. And they wouldn't accept his payment for that person. He had to fight to make that happen. So it's really a strange culture that we have developed, this lack of reverence for the elderly unless they are in high positions of power. Another people's back to the Arab Emirates. So I also was told the story that this one student was saying, yeah, my uncle or great uncle lived in an oasis a little bit away from the city in the desert and walked every day back and forth between his home and the oasis and the rest of the family. And he grew to be 132. Now, again, the Western world will dispute that, well, there were no proper birth certificates. And I think most people on the planet actually can count. And the Arabic world brought us our numbers and our number system. So I'm thinking there may be a chance that they were able to count years as well and keep some kind of a record. So he grew to be 132. And for some reason, that did not surprise me. Um, as I had already lived in Africa and had seen other cultures that just do things differently than the Western world. And we so often are taught that everybody else is so much less developed, right? Or so much less capable, therefore, in all arenas of life, which is so not true. So, another people that I found out not so long ago, now quite a few years ago, are the Hunza, Hunza, or Hunza, or people in the Himalayas in northern Pakistan who literally were described even in the, and I had to go through to European websites to find these stories and newspaper articles again, because in America you just will not hear about cultures that have a better life than we have and have had that better life for centuries or even millennia. The Hunza, when journalists went there in the 1900s, 1980s in particular, um, were living on average to 120. So that means that there were people who were quite a lot older and also younger. And I looked it up again today to be sure that the the today's politics haven't completely eliminated those facts, and they hadn't in the European um, even Googles and newspapers, etc. So I looked in the German and the French. So yeah, they found that families live on average to 120, that women still have children into their 60s, that young women get married in their 30s, and that this whole life is full of celebration, full of hard work too, because they grow all their own food and have this fasting time every late winter, early spring, until the new crops come in, where they live on apricot dried apricot juice, I guess like smoothie like, right? And they also eat a lot of apricot kernels, which are seeds, which are like almonds, like smaller almonds, and very, very highly nutritious. So the Hunza also used to walk for miles, on average 10 plus miles every day, on these steep mountain paths across from one village to another, and to their fields, etc. Their fields being on terraces in the mountains in the Himalayas. And their food was, once again, majority raw food. And it's funny to read these early articles from the 1920s, when Europe just became so proud of the fact that that people can now all get some meat, and they're all well nourished now, and they're describing these people, you know strangely they can survive on just fruits and vegetables. So like there must be a really weird human species, really weird genetics, that they can survive on fruits and vegetables, of course. um, and they were also described everywhere as almost entirely disease free, no diseases. What else? So they had everything that I was describing. They had the highly dense and high quality nutrition. They had great air up there in the mountains, mountain air. They had a rich culture with lots of rituals around celebrations of weddings and anniversaries and celebrations of harvests and births and deaths and all those celebrations of life. And they were laughing a lot. Now I'm saying were because, of course, there are still Hunza in the mountains, but roads have been built into them. And what comes with roads? Inevitably, McDonald's or something of the kind. So the culture has been highly compromised, and therewith the longevity has decreased drastically. So but there are these stories and special interviews also with people. There's a story of a Turkish man. A photograph was taken of him, so he must have been in the 1800s because that's when photography first was invented and could be printed. um, Supposedly he grew to be 157. But now that is called a mythology, right? um, but there's definitely recently died a shepherd in Bolivia, again in the mountains, outdoors, moving all the time with the sheep and having a great family to come back to. Um, I think he was proud of his 40 grandchildren and great grandchildren, so very reproductive. Grew to be 123. Recently, an African woman was collecting firewood and staying in the woods one day at 123. That's why the number reminds me of her. There's a nice interview with a 100-year-old woman recently in Germany who drives her own car, who goes to fashion shows and has photo shoots and really loves her life. And then, of course, it turns out, oh, she's vegetarian. That's the word more used than vegan in the German context. Another one feels like she only started her life in her 80s after her husband passed in his 70s, and then lives to 108 with her family and meets all these new family members that she never knew she had, etc. But again, there is this purposeful existence to actually, she says, I became myself after my husband, who was very oppressive and not in love with her, but rather probably in love with men, she suggests. But who then feels freed from this oppressive environment and begins to live her own self into her hundreds. So all these stories tell the same story, and I'm sure they exist everywhere on the planet. When there is that combination of a loving community, loving relationships, like the Harvard study said, community, purpose in the community, or purpose for others, which of course automatically creates some kind of community. And there's one word I haven't said yet that, of course, is for me included in celebrations, etc. It's gratefulness. When you celebrate something, obviously you're grateful for having something, right? That's why you celebrate it. So gratefulness is rolled into that whole living purpose, community, environment, contribution, and therefore leads to a happy life. And physically functioning has to do with all of that as a basis, because then you become more likely to actually look after this body and start working out and start doing the right thing with your nutrition and your breathing and your sleeping for your body, so that you can stay around and can contribute more to the respective community you're in. Good. So now our time is up. And I haven't even talked about the fact that if we have had a rich life, like I have certainly had an incredibly rich life so far, and I'm way not done, then we've already had all this experience and we saw the times changing. And if we keep our brain astute and functioning, then we see that it is okay that the young people move into yet another way of living. And we don't regress to saying, well, when I was young, everything was better, no. When I was, it used to be so good. And now look what they're doing. That's the exactly wrong and self-destructive attitude. And unfortunately, so many people fall into that. Now the world is going to shits, and it's all wrong. But the fact that we have all this experience and we can remember that our grandmothers said the same thing. They would say, well, when I was young, things were in good order and people behaved right and so forth. So if we don't fall into that trap, thinking that our young years were the only ones that mattered and were right or correct or something, then we can bring all these experiences into today, and we can actually function in collaboration with the next generations. And that's where we become beneficial to the next generations. I was just working today with a young girl client of mine who was summarizing a book that she read and was discovering that 12-year-old that she really loves reading and writing, and other people love something else. And so becoming herself at that young age is such a beautiful thing, right? And honoring that, from my point of view, even though in today's world, of course, the kids all have these and they all go, but we can make friends with those devices, and we can incorporate our experience into what we can then teach or communicate with the younger generations. So be meaningful. Join the course that I'm offering. If you're seeing this later, of course, I don't know whether I'll still have that course, but I always have courses where I help you come into your own, like this 12-year-old today just realized, and like my 80-year-old, now 85-year-old friend realized when she was 80, yet another career is possible. Yet another expression of her true self is possible. Oh, and I just had an 83-year-old client who decided that he needs to get back to art and creating sculptures. So it's not a unique situation, and you may have that same desire to come into your own and create your best life, your best chapter in your 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, 100s. Do it. I look forward to hearing about it and sharing your goals and helping you get there. Okay, that's it for Age is Beautiful. It really is. when you keep your body and your spirits together. And of course, you can still look cute too. I'm not particularly dressed up because, again, I was working with the young'uns and I was cleaning the house, etc. So, but that's the point, that you can be happy, functioning, healthy, and productive at any age. Ciao. Stay beautiful.